to Season 2 of Lightwork Presents Everything is Connected, where we share inspiring stories with artists and art professionals on a wide range of topics, including race, work ethics, inspiration, and the ways in which art influences and is affected by culture. Join us as we continue the journey of sharing the interesting and inspiring stories of some of today's hottest artists and art professionals in the industry. Let's go! This episode was recorded in Miami in 2020. On this episode, we're joined by Jake Troyli. Jake Troyli investigates the construction of otherness and the commodification of the Black-brown body, confronting and exploring labor capitalism and sweat equity as a demonstration of value. He makes energetic paintings, often featuring a self-portrait or avatar of himself embedded in engaging scenes, with a classic approach, utilizing techniques formalized during the High Renaissance. Underpainting and toning are central to the conception of each work, beginning with a burnt sienna foundation to establish values. In a timely evolution of his practice, Troyli expands the functionality and influence of his figures, imbuing them with new agency and establishing absurd narratives to consider the timeless conversations surrounding the preconceived notions of identity and value structures. Through the presence of prop-like iconography and compositions reminiscent of community theater sets, Troyli positions his figures as performing commodities constantly on display. I'd like to tailor this episode with a few topics and ideas that will guide us. So, the first one is about the multiracial experience and the multi-ethnic experience. I'm also multiracial, and I know you are too. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about what that has been like for you growing up with a multiracial experience, some of the things that have made your life easier and or more difficult, and some of your perspectives on race and the ability to speak with your friends, family, and your community about racial issues.
Yeah, I guess when to start with like the first idea, like what it's been like to be biracial, because I'm half black and half white, and actually both of my parents are too, but I was just raised by my mom, so it was just me and growing up. And I guess when I think about like early on what that meant, I mean, my mom was really good about it because she made it pretty clear to me early. She wasn't like, okay, you're mixed or whatever. She was like, you're a black person, but you also do happen to be half white. And I think that that's a really important distinction and something to consider. But when I was younger, I mean, we're such tribal beings. It's like you want to be able to associate visually with people. And so early on, I remember kind of being in this weird, visual limbo and just wishing that I was, darker skinned or even lighter skinned, just to kind of like have to fit somewhere. Because I don't remember when I was young necessarily having other friends that were biracial. It was just, my mom. So I definitely remember that being, like an early observation or an early thing that I had to kind of contend with. And, over time it changed as I kind of just became more comfortable with myself and understanding what it meant to kind of be able to, I don't know, navigate race in this very strange and I think unique way. But that's also like with that, I mean, it's definitely a challenge. I mean, you think about colorism and experiencing colorism kind of, from both sides, and like this, like being light skinned and what that meant. And and then to move into the idea of like making things easier or harder, that's one of those tricky areas, because like there's definitely this I don't know, this associated positivity with being light skinned, and what does that mean? I actually have a friend who is also light skinned, and he said that he had noticed he was in a living situation with a darker skinned friend, and there were people that like would speak to my friend, my light skinned friend, to like speak to the dark skinned friend, like he was kind of like acting as a conduit or something. There's this weird, I don't know, there's just this weird difference with the way that people treat you and sort of idealize light skinnedness, and obviously that's so problematic. And then once you realize later that you kind of benefited from these systems, how do you contend with that?
Absolutely.
And at the same time, I'm 6'9", right? I'm 6'9", and that's one of those.
You're a tall guy.
I'm tall as hell. Yeah, it's and it's really interesting because that's another thing that's kind of made my life easier and harder, right? I
Right.
think people are sort of sometimes disarmed by my height, and they really want to like, oh, you're so tall, like so amazing, but at the same time, like I can't fit on airplanes. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
it's kind of interesting, but also being 6'9", being black, I probably 7 times a day when the world is fully operational and I'm out in public, people ask me, oh, you, the first thing they say is, how tall are you? And then they go, do you play basketball? Immediately. Like, it's just like right on the heels of it. And I mean, in my case, the answer is yes, because I did play basketball in undergrad, but it's still one of those, like, you just get this sort of snap judgment. People think that because of the way that you look and the way that you're built, that there's this thing that you're supposed to be doing, right? And I think that's been interesting as I've sort of moved later into my life into, being an artist professionally. It's, people are like, what? They ask me what I do, and I tell them I'm an artist. I'm like, what? Like, why are you not in the NBA? Like, why are you not playing basketball? It's like, damn, bro. Like, I just like to paint. I don't really.
Can
And
I
it's
live?
yeah. Can I live? Like, I just want to make paintings. But it's, yeah. I mean, and so there's this. I don't know. It's being tall, being light skinned. I also have pointed eyebrows, for in case you didn't know that. So there's like a lot going on visually that sort of,
What does
you
that
know,
mean?
the pointed eyebrows.
Yeah.
My eyebrows actually come to a point in the middle. Like I guess it's just like a genetic, like the middle part of my eyebrows, the follicles curl upward.
You
So
mean
I have
like a
these.
unibrow?
No, like my eyebrows go up into a point.
Oh,
Um, you,
wow.
s- yeah, you see it in all my self portrait paintings. Like I really emphasize it. It's just weird. I guess I don't know if it's a mutation or what, but I have, yeah, pointed eyebrows. So there's a lot going on, and I just, it's hard not to really feel, in a lot of spaces, just like othered for something, right? There's this one, there's something, in most spaces where I exist where I'm othered. And actually, you know, I talk about playing basketball in college. That was kind of where that was felt the least, right? Because I wasn't even the tallest person on my team. We had a homie from the Sudan that was 7'2", and so I'm kind of
Wow.
yeah, I'm existing in that space as like a little slightly above, and on that team, on my basketball teams, white people were in the minority. So it was it was kind of it was kind of an interesting space to exist in, especially thinking about that as undergrad. And then after undergrad finishing, moving to grad school, where I was the only black person in my program, you
Right.
know, and there's just this like really sort of immediate shift, that which I thought was crazy. And definitely, when you're thinking about like creating a practice in grad school and really starting to investigate the things that you're thinking about, that's hard for that not to factor in.
Definitely. So, just so that I have a clear picture of everything,
Hmm.
in your undergrad, were you also studying art or?
Hmm. Yeah, no, I was. But so, when you get a basketball scholarship, you're kind of just going where the scholarship is. So I was
Yeah.
playing for a small Division 1 a school called Presbyterian College in South Carolina. And yeah, I was majoring in art. But one of the things about being a collegiate athlete is the primary focus of your time at the school is always the sport.
Right.
They try to say that that's not the case. Like, you're a student athlete, student first, right? But the schedule is ridiculous. Like, we would wake up in the morning and we'd do weights and then some conditioning, and then we would go to like a study hall, or you go to breakfast, you go to classes, then after that you go to practice, and then you'd have like, sometimes you'd have post practice weights, film session, and then you have a curfew and you have to go to bed and then repeat the cycle. And you know, it just became the thing that was the most important. You were on road trips all the time. So you didn't really have the in class, I don't know, you didn't really have the in class presence that some of your non athletic or your non athlete classmates would have. So really, the undergrad education was minimal, right? It was just kind of something that I knew that I wanted to do, and then you kind of have to like make it fit with basketball.
Right.
Yeah, and so that was, and like I said, it was, I didn't like go to an art school, right? It was just the school that I was at to play basketball, and then whatever the art program was there, that's what I was, that's what I had to work with. So I ended up, when I graduated, there were two art professors in the school, and one was like a watercolor landscape painter, and the other one made jewelry, and they're both really amazing. But if you look at my work, neither watercolor nor jewelry making factor in at all, right? So I kind of, which was really interesting, I think, because they were so different from what I was interested in or was starting to be inclined toward. I kind of just got to develop a way of painting and working that was interesting to me without being too, like, I don't know, if I was being taught by an oil painter, for example, maybe they would like tell me how to paint.
Yeah.
And then that becomes something that's so foundational, maybe you can't ever shake that.
Right.
But instead, I was, in a sense, even though I was in this institutional setting, I was able to do a lot of self-teaching and like exploring different ways of painting that I was excited about, with a little bit of guidance and sort of like a presentation of like material and kind of like a framework to work within. But other than that, I really got to kind of just do what was exciting for me.
Yeah, I'd love to dive a little bit more into that. I mean, especially sort of like the pathway that kind of led you from, being in school and pursuing your athletic,
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
know, degree and having a scholarship, but
Hmm.
then finding your way to an interest in arts, and then discovering
Hmm.
your own talents within
Hmm.
within art. So how did you make your way from your undergraduate to your graduate program?
Hmm. Yeah, so when I graduated from my undergrad program, I had an agent and everything to play basketball overseas. Like that was what I was going to do. Like that was my plan. And I was completely just that's what I was thinking about. I was talking to a couple teams. I had two offers. I had an offer to play in Greece and an offer to play in Mexico, right at, it was like this weird crossroad in my life. And I had just gotten a job because it was, the time between undergrad and going and playing overseas is an awkward amount of time. Like, you can sign a contract with a team kind of at any point during the year. So there's no like set season beginning. And so because of that, I was just like waiting. And in that time, I had gotten a job at Kaiser University. Actually, I'd gotten a job at this place called, I think it's called like Sindaver in Tampa, and I was like making fake body parts for these like human simulation cadaver type things, like for CPR and stuff. It was wild. And then I transitioned from that, and I had a job at Kaiser University in financial aid. And right at that time when I got these offers from these teams, and I kind of was just at this point where I was over it, like the business of basketball. It was too much, and I just made a decision to just keep working at that point. And so I was working in financial aid at Kaiser University in Tampa, which was just un you just it was unbelievable. I think it's great because I got to experience this kind of 9 to 5. I worked there for like 2 years, and you know the whole time I'm working there, I'm coming home every night and just painting. And I was just making horrible paintings, just painting all the time, just I could, whatever I was thinking about at that moment, I was just painting. It was like a flurry. So I'd be at work from 9 to 5. I'd come home and I would just paint. And I did that, for the 2 years that I was in school, for the 2 years that I was working at the school, until I was like, yo, I need to, this has to be what I do, and how do I take that next step? And I applied for grad school at University of South Florida in Tampa. And I actually applied twice. The first time I applied, I was like a year into working at Kaiser, and I got rejected. And it was the only school that I applied to. And it's again one of those moments where like in hindsight, I'm so thankful for it, because I was really upset that I got rejected. And I was like, what? I was like, okay, I'm about to go in. And so then I worked for another year just making again, just crazy amount of paintings. And I applied again and I got in. And it's a great program. It's a 3-year program, and it's interdisciplinary. So you're working next to photographers, sculptors, whatever, and they give you a studio. The program's fully funded, and yeah, it was kind of like this weird incubation chamber where I just got to kind of work for 3 years making paintings and really thinking about what it is that I wanted to say and what it is that I wanted to do. Yeah, and I just graduated in May of 2019.
Right. I mean, that sounds like, as you were describing that kind of incubation environment, I was thinking about how special situations like that can be,
Hmm.
because it's almost like you're existing within this very, even if it's really creative and it allows you to be incredibly dynamic and experimental within the confines of the environment, you're kind of, it's almost like because you're there, you're able to create things that you might never be able to create in the same way somewhere else.
Hmm. Absolutely.
And so you said it's interdisciplinary, right? So you would be sitting side by side next to sculptors, photographers, people within other spaces in visual arts. How do you think that environment and just having the exposure to people who are thinking critically about art in a different way than you might be, how did that experience like lend itself to the way you think about art?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that it was exactly what I needed.
Right.
And the reason I say that, okay, so like I said before, when I was an undergrad, my arts kind of experience was very limited. And before undergrad, I had, no idea like about contemporary art, what, even modern art necessarily. Like I was very, very uneducated. And so moving into my graduate program, I considered myself almost like a clean slate, right? I mean, when I got into grad school, I didn't even know who Kahindi Wiley was. Like I had no idea. So I was very, very much open and willing to learn from everybody. And so getting all these perspectives that are very different. And I think being a painter, not just listening to painters all day, is really good for you. They can kind of just become too much, and too singularly focused. Because I definitely think like work at its best should exist beyond the medium that it's working inside of, right? And so it having these people that were so smart. They had such an understanding of contemporary art, and, what it meant to have a self-sustaining practice. Like those things are, it was really, really incredible. And people were just giving me just so many jewels of wisdom. I mean, my first critique, the first semester, I got filleted, right? Like it was, they just went in on me, but it was amazing. And at the end of it all, they recommended that I go see the Kerry James Marshall show at the Met Brower at that time in New York. It was Mastery. It was the Mastery show. And
That
so,
was that's probably one of the most like important shows that I saw in the last 10 years that made me think about art in a completely different way.
absolutely.
It was
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
beautiful.
It's so good. And I really think that show in a lot of ways kind of showed me a lot about what it means to like have a presentation of work, and
Mhm.
also how an artist, one of the things, and this is kind of like a little bit off the topic, but I love the way that Kerry James Marshall had the huge scale works, right, that are like
Massive.
laid out kind of like tapestry, and they're
Mhm.
hanging on the wall, and they have so much power and so much weight. But then the small paintings, like Portrait of the Artist as a Shadow of His Former Self, is in the other room, and it's tiny, but it holds just as much weight.
Right.
And so for me, that was always really important. Like there's this flex, there's this ability to work in the large scale and really capture attention and really harness this energy, and then also be able to do the same thing on the smaller scale. And so like things like that, just like this coming from no idea, or having no real concept of what the contemporary art world held, and then being sort of thrust into this show was just like, oh my god, like there's so much potential here. There's so much potential to do something that can be seen as really important and really impactful. And yeah, I mean, again, I was in a crit full of like photographers, sculptors, and people just knew, they could tell that that's what I needed to see, and that's where I needed to go. And yeah, I think it's amazing. I also don't think you can ever get enough variance in terms of the voices that you're responding to and listening to when it comes to like your work.
Right. Like the more that you allow the more that you allow this discourse to happen between you and someone else who obviously is just gonna, by virtue of not being you, is gonna have a different perspective. It's like the more informed your work can be.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But I think that that also is true when you think about like how one finds inspiration, or how one kind of,
Totally.
how one kind of develops a certain way of making art. Because, for me, there's definitely this, like, my earliest memories of like seeing something that really, really inspired me or really, really made me want to make art was, my mom subscribed me really early on to Mad Magazine. And it's just, super graphic, super illustrative. They were examining, social justice. They were examining, civil rights. They were examining government. They were examining real philosophy and really important topics, but they were doing it with humor and with this sort of like subversive lightness. And I think that, when I think of the cornerstones to my practice, that's what I think of, right? It wasn't like the first thing I was exposed to was Kerry James and Marshall. That came later. The first thing that I was exposed to was something that, some people consider lowbrow, or like, I mean, not in the same sort of league as these like contemporary art giants. But for me, it was so important, and it just became something that stuck. And you see it in my practice. Like, that is kind of, it's not just one thing. I haven't been like staring at contemporary art my whole life. I've been looking at all, like, pulling from these different sources, like Calvin and Hobbes, like the Far Side, just these really graphic, frontal, amazing artists who were working in a medium or in a way that I think holds a lot of power when you combine it with subject matter, that is very intense. And there's like this way of, I don't know, I think surprising your audience. And I think you can only do that if you have like a varied structure that you're pulling from.
Right. I'm down here in Miami now, and I
Hmm.
went to David Castillo Gallery, and I saw a new series of paintings by Von Span.
Yeah.
And he's someone that I would really love to talk to. But moving forward, I was doing some research on him, and there's like a quote where he's like, I've never, and I'm paraphrasing, but essentially what he was saying was like, I've never understood why people get so caught up in like one style. Like for
Totally.
me, I think that throughout the course of my career, my style's going to change, right? One signature look that maybe what people think I'm doing, or as or what I'm going to continue to do, can definitely change within the next 6 months or year. Again,
Hmm.
I'm elaborating a bit on what he said, but
Hmm.
the little seed of it was just that style is fluid. And some
Totally.
artists come up with a signature and work that signature their entire career, and
Hmm.
other people change, like over a 40 or 50-year career, change their style many times.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So with
And
that,
and
no, go ahead.
I mean, yeah, I think that it's 100% true, right? And I think the reason is, if you really break it down, it's how can you expect your output to remain constant if you as a person are constantly in a state of flux? Like, we grow every day, every year. We're a different person in a lot of ways. We're we're taking in so much more. We're pulling from the world around us, which is changing. Like, our environment's changing. We're growing. We're aging. And so you should expect that. You should expect the work to change. And I think that it's one of those things that's, I think, important, especially when you consider like a practice, an art practice, a sustainable art practice. Yeah, you can definitely just paint a certain thing into the ground, and you can just do it. Some people do it, right? Some people may have just like one trick, but it's a really, really, really good trick, and that's what they do. But I love this idea of like constantly being in a state of growth. And if you allow yourself to be in a constant state of growth, then you have to allow your work to be in a constant state of growth. And so, yeah, it's exciting. I mean, it's definitely a little bit nerve wracking or anxiety inducing to like, no, there's this thing that's like working, but to then change it. You have to have a lot of confidence in yourself and your ability to to make work and make things that are impactful, to not just get too comfortable with the thing that you know is working,
Right.
and be willing to kind of, to play with it.
Yeah, and like, to get out of the comfortable zone where you're
Yeah.
not challenging yourself and push yourself to do something you haven't done before.
Right.
I wanted to, that's a nice segue into talking a little bit about your artistic style. You mentioned Mad Magazine, and I didn't have a visual reference that popped right into my head, so I did a little quick search, and then I saw it and I started thinking about your work, and I was like, oh, okay, so this really makes sense. So some of my questions are just, how did you find your artistic style, and
Hmm.
how are you continuing to evolve with that?
Hmm.
What have been some of your influences? Do you think your style will change in the future? And are you creating a signature?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, when you start to think about like the influences and what is what kind of like brought me into this like feverish desire to make work, it's definitely those things. Mad Magazine, really, really, really graphic, illustrative drawings that I was looking at earlier in my life that just became, you know, I think as an artist, it's just the truth is you're maybe I'm not, I shouldn't speak for everybody, but I'm making images that are attractive to me. I'm making images that I would want to look at first and foremost, right? Because that's where it comes from. When I was drawing as a kid, and I think everyone kind of does this, you're like drawing to create something, to take something. I couldn't have the thing, so I wanted to draw it and like make it mine. And over time, that just, as you start to really figure out what it is that you respond to, and then you're trying to kind of embody that with what you're making. That's just really important to me as a person who creates something. So that was like, I think, a turning point when I started going, wow, like I really started to idolize these artists. And like I said, there was this way that they were using humor and lightness and this sort of like ability to joke about things that are very, very serious, that I think allows for a much more complicated response from your viewer, which is important to me. I want there to be a complexity to the response and to the way that the work is interacted with. So yeah, and actually I'll give you a little bit of an anecdote, because I was doing this and I was drawing and think, but then there was a moment, and it was before basketball, it was before anything, that I sort of realized that like I really wanted to be and could be an artist professionally. I was in 6th grade and I was drawing and selling little porno strips in class.
What do you
And
mean?
I was I actually had a little operation going in 6th grade where I was drawing little porn comic strips.
No
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. So I was selling them for like, $5 each or whatever. And one day I messed up and I passed it down the table to the kid, the client, if you will. And on the way down the table, some little snitch kid grabbed it, saw it, just walked it right up to the teacher. It was the most it was it was the most like clear act of snitching I'd ever seen. It was horrible. It was terrible.
Oh, fuck.
Yeah, yeah, it
I'm
was bad.
sorry.
So he shut my whole operation down.
Right, you were done after that.
I was done. So the teacher looked at it and was very, really, really upset. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, what is this? And I was like, oh, and he's like, well, I'll be calling your mother tonight. So I did the thing that, I think any if you're a little savvy and you know how your parents work, you got to get ahead of it, right? So I told my mom. That's what I did before the teacher called. I told her. I was crying, weeping, and she was like, okay, okay. And then she got the call from the teacher, and she picked it up, and she still talks about this, with pride. She picked it up, and the teacher told her what happened, and he sort of paused and like, I guess, was looking at it, and he told her, and he goes, well, they're actually pretty good. And she relayed that information to me, and I think there was like, it's, my mother is amazing in terms of like her support, and she's always been really supportive of me being an artist. But even in that moment, she was like, oh yeah, if you're gonna do it, at least do it well.
Right.
And yeah, but it was at that moment I was like, wow, this is really there was something. I mean, obviously getting caught was terrible, but this transaction, like making these drawings that people were willing to like separate with their money for, that they really found joy in, was definitely one of those moments where I was like, okay, yeah, I really like this. And then I see that now in hindsight, right? Because I think I forgot about that moment later on in my life, and then now I look back and I go, wow, that was the beginning, you know?
Right. And you might not have known it when you were in undergrad, right? You might not have known it except
Right.
like when you were in your MFA program. But when you look back in your life and you think, wow, where was that moment where I really knew that I wanted to pursue art? That was it, you know?
Right. And I think that that's really, really exciting for me. Like that's the moment. I think that's really beautiful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, and then like as far as, creating a signature within
Mm,
your work, within your
mhm,
practice, do you feel that you're doing that? I mean, a lot of
mm,
your pieces from what I've seen are like you're working in portraiture, right?
mhm, mhm. It's definitely something that I so when you say creating a signature, I wouldn't say that I'm like actively trying to do that. But what I would say is that there's definitely a recognizable element in the work right now, and it's something that is really interesting to me right now. And I'm considering this idea. I'm really considering my own image as this kind of elastic thing, this
Yeah.
elastic avatar that I can manipulate and sort of
Yeah.
stretch and fit and move through spaces. And thinking about my own form and my own self image as this performer, right? There's this idea of performance in my work that's really exciting to me, and it's something that I'm thinking about now, and I think I've kind of always been thinking about in life, and so now like bringing it to canvas is really exciting, and it's really fruitful. I when I look back at undergrad and playing basketball and kind of being this athlete and being this performer, I started, I think, to get really critical of this relationship between the player or the performer or and the audience, right? Like the spectacle and the spectator and that dynamic. And so now in my work, I am considering my subjects, the subjects of my paintings, which in a lot of cases are myself, as being simultaneously subject and object, and being
Right.
sort of just on display for the consumption of the viewer, or by the viewer. And so as I start to experiment with that, what does that mean? What does that mean to have this malleable form that I can position, and I can make it do whatever I want it to do for my viewers? And so that, I guess if I had to think of like something that is signature, that's really important to me, and it more than like the image of the portrait, right? Is the ability to kind of harness the humor in these situations, and kind of tackle themes that are not funny, and how those that can work in conjunction, with what it is that I'm making. And so like creating an image that is at once funny and can also be heartbreaking, and kind of playing with that sort of, I don't know, that vibration between the two things. So that for me, if I had to think of something that I want to be like a signature, it's the fact that there's this element to my work that I think makes the digestion of the painting more complex.
Yes. Absolutely. Completely understand that. And just sort of rounding out the episode, what would you say are some of your artistic influences, some of the artists that you really like and admire,
Mhm.
things that you're drawn to?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, most cartoons and comics are really exciting for me. So, yeah, like Mad Magazine, Far Side, yeah, Calvin and Hobbes. My mom had a really great collection growing up, and I would just kind of pour through them. But now, when I start to look at the more contemporary artists that I'm really excited by, and just fine artists in general, I look up, obviously Kerry James Marshall, but I love Faith Ringgold's work. You know I think there's an element. Okay, so Northern Renaissance paintings and painters are really really exciting for me. So like Hans Memling, there's this weirdness, a strangeness to those paintings, and there's sometimes their proportions are off, and like the babies look like tiny old men, and it's just this very wild. It seems like they were rendering what they were looking at, but it's also in a sense like world building, which is something that I do in my work too. So there's kind of this construction of this alternate reality where things are just like a little bit off, right? And I think that that is so amazing. I mean, what good is it to render things perfectly the way that they look, right? I think that we just take a photo of that. When we're making a painting, there's a painting in and of itself. All painting is abstraction, right? So it's kind of like this ability to manipulate and prod at things and make things, just a little bit wrong. And I think that there's something that's really attractive about that for me.
Definitely. Definitely. I think that that's everything I wanted to cover.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Earlier you mentioned like the perspective on race and the ability to speak with friends, family, and community about racial issues, and I think that that's just a really interesting thing to consider. You know, always, but also at this moment. Because I've had to have some really, really difficult conversations with people over the past year. As I'm sure most of us have, and I just think that and this is just more of like us talking to each other, but I just think that it's really important for all of us to allow ourselves to communicate about race with the people around us, because it's so hard to kind of just keep and whatever it is that you're feeling at that moment just bottled inside, especially with things that are so integral to who we are, like race. I mean, it's just we have to allow ourselves that open line of communication, even if it's hard. And so it's just been something that this year I've really, really noticed. I mean, and I've lost friendships, over it, and I've also kind of strengthened the ones that obviously were strong enough to withstand some of those things. So it's just it's definitely been a time of reflection in terms of realizing that you owe it to yourself and to your relationships to be able to talk about these things um, with the people that are closest to you.
Absolutely. I think the point that you made about just being able to have conversations about race is so important, because in so many situations, like whether it's, if it's personal, that's one thing. But in the professional space, it's also it's like even more intensely difficult. It's like these are things that we are all affected by, right?
Right.
Every single day, whether we want to speak about it or not. And if you're a white person in America and in other parts of the world, and your whiteness has, given you so much privilege that you don't even take a moment to allow yourself the ability to listen to a different perspective, I think everyone loses in a
Mm-hmm.
situation like that. It's not just a person of color, it's not just a white person. It's just like if no one leaves a situation with more knowledge than they started with, or better understanding than they had when they began, then it's almost like, what was the point?
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. Why I just think any of these spaces that we enter in life in general, we should always be open to leaving with something more than we came in with, right? That seems really simple to me, actually. That seems like
Exactly.
something, but I don't think that it's people necessarily see it that way. I mean, even if you just thinking about like grad school and the conversation we just had about grad school, I being able to go into that space, just willing to listen to people instead of like trying to force what it was that I already knew into what I was doing there. It changed my life completely. And
Right.
then and that's something as that's something that's art. That's not even just like interpersonal relationships and race. And I mean, these themes are so important, and these things are so important and pivotal to our success as humans. So yeah, I know, I totally agree. You just have to the openness and willingness and sort of, I don't know, this like expectation maybe that you're going to leave with more than you came in with is just so important.
Absolutely. And then, as a final question, I'd like to ask you, what are some of the things you're most excited about when you consider the future?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a person who loves to be in the studio. I love painting and I love making images and I love what it is that I do. So I'm always really excited just about the next thing that I'm making. I'm working on, a couple new bodies of work and things are flowing right now in my new space in Chicago. And so it's just I'm so excited to get them out of my head and into the world, right?
Yeah,
If that makes sense.
of
But
course.
one of the things that like I when you come into my studio, and hopefully at some point you do get to come into my studio,
I
I
love
have
that.
I literally have work from wall to wall, just because it's this constant expulsion of what it is that I'm thinking about. And just like you don't want to keep these things bottled inside when we talk about being able to communicate openly with the people closest to you, I don't think you should keep these visions or these paintings that you want to make, these things inside. You have to get them out. And so having this sort of visual manifestation of my own head inside the studio is so exciting because I get to, make them tangible. And then even more beautiful beyond that is allowing those things now to exist in the world, right? Where people then get to form their own relationships with these things and they kind of get to be embraced, and that is so exciting. So even if it's just the idea of getting these things out of my head into the world and into spaces where they can then be interacted with by a new audience and new eyes, for me that holds so much potential that it's the most exciting thing that I could ever even imagine.
I love that. I want to say thank you so much for joining me in this episode.
Of course, thank you. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's nice that the conversation can just flow in this really natural way. We can kind of like talk about these topics that are things that are related to art, but also things that are more just related to life and living, you
Yeah,
know?
totally.
Super, super
Totally.
important. So I hope that I get to come to Chicago sometime soon.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. That'd be awesome. How was Miami?
Miami is amazing. It's like
Yeah.
really hot right now, like super hot day today in particular. But the weather's been kind of some days it's weird. Like it's winter here, and just as a New Yorker and someone who hasn't spent much time in the city, I didn't know what to expect. So some days were raining and cold, and actually cold. Like you need a hoodie or a jacket. But then on a day like today, it's like, like 85 and sunny. And like, I just went to the beach this morning. So it's amazing.
Right, right, right.
Okay. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye. That was our episode with Jake Troyli. I want to give a big shout out and a thank you to Jake for joining us on this episode of Lightwork Presents Everything is Connected. And it's a wrap, folks. That's our episode of Lightwork Presents Everything is Connected. Conversations on culture and current events with some of today's hottest creative contemporaries. These episodes were recorded in between New York and Miami and reflect the times we are living in, while also adding some commentary to the social, cultural, and political issues of the past year. I'm your host, Folasade Ologundudu, and we'll see you next time. As always, stay motivated, stay inspired, and stay up. Peace and love, y'all. We out.